Welcome to the Geological Wayfaring the Future series. This is a special series of conversations that we are releasing in addition to our regular Tuesday podcasts. The reason being, the acupuncture and East Asian medical profession is facing a critical number of challenges as schools close. New federal guidelines on graduate education loans will dramatically change how much students can borrow. Beyond that is the issue of eroding insurance payments, and while acupuncture is increasingly integrating into the conventional system, acupuncturists are not. What are some ways we might move through the troubles of these times? That is what this series is for. We'll be listening to the perspectives and voices of practitioners who have been engaging the challenges. It's not always comfortable having conversations around difficult or contentious topics, but listening to understand, that's a good place to begin.
We only have a default rate of 2%. That doesn't mean people are making meaningful progress towards paying back their loan. It just means they're on some sort of payment plan. So that's an important distinction that people need to understand.
We are at a moment where the structure of loans and how that affects professional education is changing, not just for the acupuncture profession, but across the entire educational landscape. While it seems the storm has suddenly blown in, it's been brewing for a while. In this conversation with Ryan Hofer, we discuss the true cost of Grad Plus loans and how they have helped to fund an educational infrastructure that is now challenged with reconfiguring itself. The issue is not just in the acupuncture world. This is a systemic issue all across our educational system. We'll be discussing how a business model based on student debt became the default and what happens when that faucet finally gets turned off. Change is coming, and our profession is going to have to find a way to work with far less money coming in for student loans. And we also need to reckon with the unsustainable debt that practitioners from an earlier generation did not need to face. Ryan Hofer, welcome to Geological.
Hi, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
I'm happy to have you here. I can't believe I'm about to say this. I'm really excited to talk about numbers. I'm really excited to talk about finances and loans, things I have some understanding of, but not a ton of. We're at a really crucial moment here in the acupuncture profession, yours too, the naturopathic profession. In fact, I suspect it's not just our professions, but many professions, because the structure of loans is changing really quickly. And you are a naturopath. You went to naturopathic school. You graduated. And now you're an expert on debt.
Yes, I think many recently graduated naturopathic students and acupuncture students are quite familiar with the topic. And the schools are quite familiar with the topic too, I think, even if they won't say so.
What's the conversation? Well, two things. First of all, it sounds like you have other people, other graduates in a similar situation. Y'all are familiar with debt. I'm curious to know about what those conversations are amongst you. And then how is it that you're the one that seems to be the go-to for people to talk to about this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of taboo topic, as I was discovering as I went through the program at NUNM and graduated. I recall having a conversation with a naturopath who's been licensed for a long time. And I said, why does everybody pretend like the debt's going to get paid back? And they said, well, if they didn't, then the schools would lose their accreditation. And I was like, yeah, that's basically it. So we've been pretending for, I want to say 2 decades. We've been acting as if there was a reasonable ROI, return on investment, for the degree. because there kind of has to be, in order to bring new students in order to not feel kind of gross about bringing new students into the programs. Everybody kind of has to play along with the notion that maybe that it's very possible. And I think the flip side of that is that when that doesn't happen, then there's a lot of shame and silence around it. But if you just, we're starting to get such much more solid, I think, numbers around it. So if you look at the median debt for first professional degrees at NUNM, it's about $260,000.
So first professional degree, are we talking acupuncture, naturopathy, or either one?
That would be both.
That'd be both.
Yeah, so they're lumped together.
Okay.
On college scorecard.
And what was that number again?
260,000.
260,000.
Yeah. And then if you look at the median earnings, it's about 48,000 for the school. So just right there, you can see that's not possible.
It's not a great ROI.
It doesn't math. If you go,
it doesn't math. Yeah, that's a good way to say
the
it.
math doesn't math. And if people will go to Student Loan Planner, which is a great resource on sort of handling professional graduate degree student loan debt, their kind of rule of thumb is that if your loan balance, if it is 100 to 150% of your annual income. So like if you have a loan balance of 100,000 and your annual income is 100,000, good. That is manageable. Or if your loan balance is 150,000, okay, and you have 100,000, like, okay, that's manageable. You should consider, how am I going to pay this off? Mm-hmm. Once you get beyond that point, the rational choice is to minimize your payments, to not pay it off, and to run out the clock on the 25 years income-based repayment, which is what a lot of people end up doing. You can strategize and try to work for a nonprofit or a governmental agency and do public service loan forgiveness. If you do 120 qualifying payments, so it's 10 years, then you can get that canceled out. Now, the problem, of course, if you do the 25 years income-based repayment, at the end, you get the tax bomb, which is that loan cancellation amount is counted as income. Now you owe taxes to the IRS on that amount. Can't pay it. Okay, then you got to go. They'll garnish your wages or go onto a repayment plan.
Right. So you're still on the hook for some money in that situation.
Right.
And
right.
Is it, talking about math for a moment, is the loan at that point going to be higher than the loan that you took out initially? I guess it depends on how much you've been repaying, but there's a possibility that now your loan has ballooned, I don't know, how many factor?
Yeah, the magic of compounding interest, right? It's great when you're a saver, not so great when you're a debtor.
Yes. Now, is the loan on these student loans, we're talking about Grad Plus loans, and we're going to get into this in just a second and get into some of the details. Is this simple or compound interest on these loans?
There's certain things that will put the interest back onto the principal, like consolidation. I'm not quite sure when it all gets added back on, but the amount you owe, yes, goes up, and then you're paying interest on that amount, I believe. So I believe it's some sort of compounding formula. And so income-based repayment has been 25 years up to this point. On July 1st, that now changes. Under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the option for income-based repayment is called the Repayment Assistance Plan, the RAP. And that has 30 years before cancellation.
So if you want to run out the clock, now you got to run longer.
Correct. And it's for anybody who takes out a loan after July 1st. So all the current students who started with the understanding like, okay, maybe I can do IBR for 25 years, they are now going to get put into a 30-year repayment plan. So and when I was in school, Biden was trying to do the SAVE plan, which involved like not having the interest go back onto the principal. And I should say the RAP plan also does not put the interest back onto the principal. So in that sense, it's good.
So your principal stays the same, and that's the thing you really, you need to pay off the principal for the loan to go away.
Yeah, right. So as long as you're making these minimum payments based on your income, you're not going to get the interest just burying you. However, you have to make payments for 30 years. And I believe there's still the tax issue at the end. But anyway, I say all this stuff to say, like, we're really kind of caught in this huge system that's in flux. And it's kind of difficult for individuals to plan accordingly when the federal government itself is changing huge things every few years. But that's kind of the moment we're in, right? Also, the loan caps were very quickly implemented. Also, those were on an accelerated time schedule. Everything's been on like a kind of quick accelerated time schedule.
Am I correct, though, in that this has been coming for a while? I hear people saying this. Well, these kind of changes have been coming. It's not like it just started this year. The government's been talking about this for a while. Okay, now it's actually coming. It is accelerated, you could say. In fact, it comes next month, right? That's when it's going to start.
Right, yeah.
But let's go back in time for a moment to a gentler day, a gentler loan day, right? Before the year 2005, right? 2005 is when this Graduate Plus loan thing came into being. Prior to that, and again, this is why I'm talking to you, because I'm trying to get the details on this. Prior to that, student loans were like 2 to 3%, and at least for undergrad. And as I recall in the 80s, I was in graduate school in the 80s, and I recall having some loans that were like 2 to 3%, and the interest started to accrue 6 months after I was out of school. Now, that was a long time ago. This changed in 2005 with the Graduate Plus. Can you tell us a little bit about what Grad Plus brought to the loan situation? And beyond that, what did it do to the educational landscape? How did it change the educational landscape? In addition to giving, people like yourself and, and other folks an opportunity to get a graduate education, what changed in the larger world of education?
Yeah, well, Grad Plus allows you to borrow beyond tuition up to your cost of attendance. So you can essentially borrow for living expenses. Schools make a calculation. They give you an estimate. Like, I think the rough estimate for NUNM is about $35,000 per year for living expenses, which is reasonable in Portland.
Mm-hmm.
And so not only can you borrow a direct loan for the tuition, which is like $40,000 for first year ND at NUNM, but then you can borrow money that then is the base of you being even able to attend the school. And so that was a big contributor to graduate student loan debt, which is quickly increasing. I think it's the category that was increasing the most, probably because of all of this Grad Plus loans, which have a higher interest rate also than the direct student loans for tuition. But they're still eligible for income-based repayment and PSLF, all the federal loans, which is important because if you're talking about private student loans, you don't get all of the protections and the programs that federal student loans have.
Could you go over what some of those programs are for the listeners that might not be familiar with it? Why is a federal loan better than a private loan? What are you getting in addition?
Well, you get the 6 months grace period, which might also be true for private loans, but then you get deferment options, hardship options. You can get the income-based repayment. So your payments are just based on the income you report. And then you can also get the public service loan forgiveness option. And there's just a lot, my impression is that as long as you're in communication with the Department of Education, right, you're on a repayment plan. And so you're not in default. And that's an important thing to understand is the default rate, which is something like we only have a default rate of 2%. That doesn't mean people are making meaningful progress towards paying back their loan. It just means they're on like some sort of payment plan. And so that's, I think, an important distinction that people need to understand. These loans, they're not getting paid back. They're just kind of, again, it's this fantasy of like, yeah, someday, right? Someday they'll get paid back. It's like, no, it's not. It's not. It's just an economic anchor on everybody. And so from that perspective, I'm sympathetic to the idea behind the loan cap of saying like the federal government should like not be subsidizing programs that leave people much worse off. At the same time, there's jobs in society that aren't lucrative that we all want to have in society. But we've kind of been playing that game of putting it onto individual student debtors and saying like, well, it's kind of on you to move society forward, even though it doesn't work and the loans go. It's basically like the federal government is subsidizing all of this stuff. And so they kind of said, okay, we're just going to put the cap on it.
So the caps on these, correct me if I'm wrong, it's a way for the government to say, hey, look, the math doesn't math here. And for the average person doing this job, you're not going to be able to pay it back. The juice isn't worth the squeeze.
Right.
Economically, it's not worth the squeeze. You may enjoy the work, and it might be valuable, useful work, but you're not going to really be able to make a living at it.
Yeah. And the previous evaluation, was debt to income. That was the sort of Biden administration's logic of like, we're going to do a ratio. Whereas now we're just like, no, like for a graduate degree, you need to earn more than a bachelor's degree.
Mm-hmm.
No, it doesn't really take into account how much debt, so you can't really, it's hard to affect that with like scholarships, for example, because you could say, oh, well, let's subsidize all of the teaching programs and all of the counseling programs and all the sociology programs. Let's just bring the debt down and then the earnings relative to that will make sense. But now it's much more like I guess it's a pretty low bar to reach, right? That if you do a graduate degree, you should make more than a bachelor's degree.
Is that an unreasonable assumption?
I don't think so. I think that there's nothing acupuncture schools and acupuncture programs and naturopathic programs can do about it at this point to change the earnings, because they're taking a snapshot from people who graduated 4 years ago. So it kind of plays into the like, we're doomed perspective, because that's already baked in, right? So you can look at the predictive data that the Department of Education has put out, and you can say, like, it's probably going to be very similar, the first earnings test. And then the year after that, right, you can't change that. Like, you cannot change the earnings measurement until, if you were to make a change now, right, those people would have to graduate and then go into the workforce for 4 years. And then that snapshot would be taken. So how fair is it, right, that it's kind of getting implemented all of a sudden? At the same time, this has been going on for decades.
It's been going on for decades. And look, at some point, you just have to turn off the faucet, right? If someone's bleeding out, you need to stop the bleeding.
Right. And the problem is that what this sort of reveals is that it was the business model was always about the debt, right? Because once you remove that, you have to fundamentally change the workings of these nonprofits, these for-profit schools. And now people are saying like, oh no, like keep it going, right? We need the $50,000 cap, which you can make a case for. It's like, okay, if other professions are getting $50,000 annually, that's okay. But my perspective is like $50,000 isn't enough anyway for most schools. So we're kind of just like fighting each battle as we go in this like overall like losing cause. And at this point, we would have to so reform and reimagine everything all at once within like 2 years that it just doesn't seem likely. Although ACOM just released their 3 proposals to change their accreditation standards, which is a huge step forward. I think the timeline is just really tight.
The timeline is tight. And in the endeavors of human beings and the way that we work, often we wait until the last minute
Right.
I mean, I'm not, I don't want to cast dispersions at our profession. A lot of us wait till the last minute. Like, maybe we can avoid this. Maybe it's going to get better. But people coming into our practices, right? Well, I thought it was going to get better and I ignored it, but I was stupid. No, you weren't stupid. You want to wait and see if things resolve. At a certain point, you realize, no, it's not going to resolve. I need to do something.
Well, it's like not even wanting to get like lab results, or like I could say like I have your lab results, and it's like I don't want to
know
look
about
at
that. Yeah, I've had patients like that. Hey, profession, I got your lab results. I would like to get a little bit into, for the folks that don't know about it, the rise and ahead metrics, because a lot of what we've been talking about here already is based on these two federal sets of guidelines.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to understand that in the same way that you would need to understand the basics and fundamentals of any medicine that you're practicing, because that's what's setting the landscape.
Right.
And yes, schools have a business model. Well, we can talk about the business model later, and that it's based on debt. And look, for that matter, there's a bunch in our society that's based on debt. Like, don't worry about it. Just carry the debt. You'll be fine. And we can talk about that a little bit later. Depends on if you're a person who likes debt or not. I mean, there is a place for it. And I think as a medical doctor coming out of school with $260,000 of debt, you've got a whole system to catch you and support you.
Exactly.
And make that work. But if you come out as a naturopath or an acupuncturist, we don't have a system that catches us in the same way. And so that amount of money has a whole different meaning, because that's a debt. It just has a whole different meaning. So anyway, let's come back and talk about rise and ahead. They both sound like wonderful things.
Yeah. Yeah. The RISE rules were regulations to implement the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and also the AHEAD committee. So the Department of Education brings people together. They have a meeting. It's called negotiated rulemaking, and they hash all this out. Okay, what are the actual rules that implement the bigger picture? So One Big Beautiful Bill Act says no more Grad Plus, professional degrees capped at 50,000, professional graduate degrees capped at 50,000 annually, all other graduate degrees capped at 20,500 annually, or 100,000 total for those programs. So now we got to decide, okay, what's in the $50,000 category and what's in the $20,500 category. And the Department of Education decided to be very narrow and choose only 11 professional degrees for the $50,000 cap. There was a list in some law that gave examples of a professional degree. And so they took that list and then they added clinical psychology. And they said, this is it. These are the professional graduate degrees that are eligible for $50,000. And then so all of these other programs got lumped into the 20,500 category.
Now, when they chose those professions, Ryan, were they considering the landscape that the graduates would walk into and begin working in terms of being able to pay back? Or was it some arbitrary thing? I mean, often there's good reasons why people make decisions. Again, you go to medical school, you'll probably be able to pay that back, right? You're in a whole different ecosystem when you get out. There's other professions. I'm going to call our profession a profession, even if it didn't make the profession list. But it's a different ecosystem. So was there any weight given to the world that graduates would face once they were out?
I know there's a whole like rationale of why they chose to not include some degrees, right? So one of the rationales for acupuncture was I thought this was a little bit odd, but there's other entries into doing what they would consider acupuncture. So they would say like, well, PTs can needle, or other people can needle, MDs can needle. So therefore, this isn't kind of a standalone graduate professional degree. And for naturopaths, they said, well, it's not licensed in all 50 states. So it's not really a national graduate professional degree that we think should be subsidized. As far as paying it back, I don't know that they looked at price tags, but I think they said, like for nursing, it's like you can do an associate's of nursing, you can do a bachelor's of nursing to enter the profession. So therefore, we're not going to put these expensive graduate nursing degrees into the 50,000. We're only going to do it as 20,500. And the logic was this will bring the price down. This will force the price down of these programs.
Okay. I mean, fair enough. If you can go and get a job and get started in your profession and do the work and acquire skill and acquire experience at a bachelor's level, it's good to have experience to take into any kind of postgraduate work. You'll actually be better in your postgraduate work if you walk in with 3 or 5 years of experience. So I can see the rationale for that.
One of the reasons that there's like Oregon's Attorney General and 20 other states' attorneys general, that they're bringing a lawsuit to challenge these regulations because they're saying, no, these degrees are professional, you were too arbitrary, and this drastically hurts students and access and these programs. So that's going to be worked out in a lawsuit. Basically, who qualifies for the 50,000.
And that's happening at a federal level as well, isn't it? Isn't that happening at a national level as well, that there's lawsuits to try to slow it or repeal it or change it?
Right. All the attorneys general are bringing a lawsuit against the federal government, the Department of Education. So that'll be a national thing. And who knows, maybe, I don't know if the caps would somehow be delayed, but that's the $50,000 cap is in the law. Like that's written into the law passed by Congress. So I think that it's just a matter of, okay, who qualifies for that category? So maybe they'll let more programs qualify until they figure it out. I don't know.
Okay, so I think that's a really good question. Well, I mean, there's also the question of, do you want to burden people with this kind of debt? So there's that, but let's just put that to the side for the moment. Looking at the $50,000 cap per year for our professions, I understand there's lawsuits, but isn't it also true that on July the 1st, this thing kicks in? So does it kick in and now you're not going to get that money? Or is it that because there's lawsuits, we're going to let some more money trickle out until the lawsuits are figured out? Where do the schools stand in terms of being able to continue to teach students at the prices that they've been teaching them?
Well, one thing that schools have done is that they're starting their cohorts before July 1st. So they're bringing a group in that is under the current system. So that group qualifies for, it's like a legacy rule, meaning they can get Grad Plus. They can get the higher direct loan cap and they can get Grad Plus loans. So it's basically like they're underneath the old system for 3 additional academic years.
Okay. So they kick the can down the road.
Right. So it's like, let's get in under the wire. So that's one option. The second aspect is that, current students who are already in are still getting the old loan system. So the effects will like increase each year, right? As you get new students coming in who aren't eligible for the old system. So you do have a little bit of planning time for that.
So they basically created a little bubble, so to speak, of a year, and maybe things work out in their favor and maybe they don't, but they've created a bubble for a year.
Yeah, and that, of course, also will influence prospective students looking at it, right? The enrollment and maybe what students choose to do. So, for example, at NUNM, we had some people did dual programs, so they were doing 2 programs. But if you were to do that, you would have to finish them within that 3 extra academic years of Grad Plus that you now have. So probably students are looking and saying, like, I just have time to do 1 program.
This is an uncomfortable question. If I were a young person and looking at, I want to get into one of these professions, but I'm really nervous about having that kind of debt, what are the resources? Where could a young person go and try to better understand the economic, financial environment that they're putting themselves into so that they can make some kind of a reasoned decision on what's good for their future and if their dream is affordable or not?
Well, I wouldn't trust a school that stands to financially benefit from you enrolling. I wouldn't trust them as the only source. So you would have to know very specific questions to answer. I think there's a concern also about the viability of your school. Am I gonna take out this loans and then the school's gonna close in 2 years and I'm gonna have to relocate out of state?
Yes, we've had
that's another huge cost.
Significant number of acupuncture schools close.
Right. Yeah.
It's nerve-wracking.
The other thing is, starting in 2027, there's going to be a whole Department of Education informational website on all of it with programmatic data. So you'll be able to just go and look at that. Right now, there's a data set, there's college scorecard, there is a predictive table, the do no harm table, which just kind of grabs that predictive data and displays it for what's out there. And I think I sent you that link, but I can send it again. And you can talk to people who are doing the work, but you do have to start asking those uncomfortable questions, right? You can't just leave it at, oh yeah, like I like it, right? I like helping people, right? I would ask questions like, okay, so how are you handling your student loan debt? Do you think you're going to be able to pay that off? How has that affected your ability to borrow for a car or a home? Mm-hmm. Do you have a spouse who you're actually relying on for your financial well-being, right? Like your healthcare and your borrowing potential. Are you separating your finances from your partner because the debt is such an anchor and it would bring you both down? So the thing is, you kind of have to know specifically like the pointed questions to ask, right? And you can ask any school, what data do you provide to prospective students? What earnings data can you provide to prospective students? And it's important to look at the median earnings rather than, let's say, the mean or the average earnings, right? You really want to say, what are your median earnings? And then what's your median debt of these programs?
And for people that don't understand the difference between median and mean, what are we looking at?
Well, the median takes into account how many people have that amount of debt. So it's weighted towards the actual number of people like at that higher amount. So because, example, if you had one person who had like really great earnings, that could pull the average up. But when you take the median, it weights the measurement statistically to take into account that that's only one person who's making those high earnings. So the median is the measurement that you want to look at, and you want to look at net income or adjusted gross income. So like after you account for your expenses. And this is kind of like a big deal in the space that some, I guess, maybe acupuncture or naturopathic organizations would say, oh, it's unfair because a lot of practitioners are small businesses. So they have all these expenses. They're making all this money, but then they have to discount their business expenses. So it's not fair. I don't really understand the argument because, yeah, everybody running a small business.
That's how businesses work.
Yeah, that's how businesses work. And I don't think they're suggesting that people are committing, like tax fraud and like hiding discretionary income or something. Like the adjusted gross income or the net income before taxes, that's how much you have to pay off your debt. And that's the important thing. Like that's your discretionary income. So I don't understand the argument, but it'd be important to look at median net income and to consider about what are your career services, right? How successful are you at getting graduates placed into employment? And you'll start to be able to tell that there's no reliable ecosystem for that. And you can factor that into your decision.
Yeah. I mean, it seems obvious to me that the vast majority of graduates from an acupuncture program or from a naturopathic program are probably going to be self-employed. I understand there's more jobs. I understand there's a move toward integration. But by and large, again, if you just look at the numbers, it's probably self-employment.
Yeah. Yeah. The numbers show that. So the question that I have is this a good use of public money?
It's a great question.
Like, should we be pumping all this money into it to get those, to have people be self-employed, right? Are the results like so fabulous for self-employed entrepreneurs? No, they're really bad from the data, from the earnings data that's being captured and shown.
For sure, having jobs makes for a more stable economic environment for the graduate.
Well, and like you said, conventional options, they might have the same or similar amount of debt, but they have public service loan forgiveness, employment options. Like those are institutional jobs or jobs for government entities that give you a reasonable plan. And I would say one huge failing of our acupuncture and naturopathic ecosystem is that we didn't work hard to set up those nonprofit employment options for new grads. Like if all of the, let's say the schools in the larger schools in the big cities, if they had formed these partnerships with health systems and said, what do we need to do? How can we get you to hire our new graduates? How can we get you to hire 5 new graduates each year? And you kept coming back to that year after year, and you had a track record and it made sense, then you're developing some sort of reasonable pathway. But instead, I think what's happened is that it's been like, well, you're on your own. We can help you write a resume, even though most people are self-employed.
I can't think of the last time I needed my resume.
Right. Yeah. And then it's like, well, it's on you. It's on you, individual, to make your way. And so it's too bad because we're seeing this kind of disillusion or kind of like unraveling of all of this. And I do think it's a tragedy because there's so much good within. There's so much that acupuncturists and naturopathic doctors can offer, but we're now stuck in this container that has been, I think, neglected for many years. And like you said, people don't want to change. In fact, people will, actively fight against a change.
I personally wait till the last minute. Seriously. I mean, if I can avoid problems, I like to try to. But sometimes situations change if you just wait it out. I mean, how do you know when to change and when not to? That's one of the big questions in life generally. I want to come back to this thing about loan forgiveness through like working with a nonprofit. And you were saying had schools built those kind of relationships, then there might be more jobs and more pathways for people discharging their debt through that kind of service work. Do I have that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, number one, do some of those pathways currently exist? And number two, what's to stop a clever young graduate from looking at, hey, there's places where I could connect up the people in my profession with these nonprofits. It helps the nonprofits. It helps my colleagues discharge their debt. I can make a little money too because I'm the middleman.
Well, there are options. I think one funny thing is that the schools themselves are the main PSLF option. So if you go to, that's what people need to understand, is all the employees of a nonprofit school can do, their payments qualify for public service loan forgiveness.
Because they're working for a nonprofit school.
Yeah, if you're working for a nonprofit school. But you kind of have this cyclical loop where to them, they might say, this is, great. Like I have a path forward, but that again, like those institutions are funded by that student debt, and most people are not getting a job at one of those institutions. So I do kind of feel like I think that the schools very well understand public service loan forgiveness, and they do understand how important that is. And they do understand that it's an employment benefit. And yet they have not fostered that arrangement for most of their new graduates. There are nonprofits like in Portland that hire naturopaths. So there are resources that could be leveraged, partnerships that could be leveraged, but it's really an institutional thing. It has to be someone at the institution going back every 6 months and saying like, is this possible? Is this possible? Is this possible? And networking on the behalf of the institution.
How does the repayment work when you're working for a nonprofit or doing some kind of service work that helps to discharge your debt? What does that pathway look like?
Well, first of all, you're probably on income-based repayment. If you're working for a nonprofit, the salary is probably low, but your payments
Commensurately low.
And then your employer verifies that you are working for them. It has to be 30 hours per week, like on average. And then the payments you make on your loan under income-based repayment then start to tally up. And so once you reach 120, then that cancels out your loan. You can work for
even
multiple.
If your loan is $300,000, you pay back 120, you're good to go.
Yeah, I mean, your payment could even be zero because your income's so low. But if you're working for a nonprofit, that monthly payment of zero still counts towards the 120. You can you can switch nonprofit employers. You can even work for one nonprofit for 15 hours a week and another nonprofit for 15 hours a week. So it's adding up to the 30. And this is like the crazy thing to me is, let's say, like, yeah, you're an MD, you graduate with $300,000 of debt, you go work at a hospital, right? Okay, you do 2 years of residency, you've already got 2 years of PSLF payments under your belt. Then you work at the hospital for another 8 years. Boom, you just got your debt canceled out. And now you're at that huge earning potential. So this is already a well-established system, that everybody is utilizing. And yet for some reason, I don't know if it's our like fringy type of sensibilities or like we like to do our own siloed things. For some reason, acupuncture and naturopathic medicine hasn't really emphasized that, even though we all want, like, we want to do helping work, right? We want to work in clinics that help the disenfranchised, the oppressed, and the poor, and those who are disadvantaged. And yet we can't seem to, like, at scale, put that together with, like, that should be under a nonprofit container, even though the schools figured that out, like, of course, a long time ago.
So this is interesting. If you built a multi-clinic nonprofit, then you could hire people into it, pay them a decent wage, do the work that we all say we want to do, and it's a pathway to discharge, because once you paid back out of your own wallet, now your loan goes away, regardless of how big it might have ballooned to.
Right. And you're kind of describing what a lot of schools do. Unfortunately, like, a lot of times their clinics lose money because it doesn't have to be optimized really. And they're getting the student debt tuition subsidizing that whole business model.
All right. Thank you. I was just trying to wrap my head around what this, because I've heard about this working for nonprofits and somehow being able to get your debt paid off. I didn't understand the details. It sounds to me like there's actually a tremendous business opportunity for somebody to put those kinds of things together.
I'm involved in a nonprofit. I founded and I'm just a volunteer executive director, but it's called the Pain Relief and Education Collective, focus on natural pain relief. So we are waiting for our nonprofit status to come through. The tricky part is, how do you chicken and egg, right? How do you have enough money to hire an employee that's then going to provide the services that bring in the revenue? So yeah, but that definitely, if we can sort of crack that code together as a community, as probably more like a local community, like within cities, then that could be really powerful to have a sort of nonprofit seeding group. That's what I wish the schools had been doing. I wish they had been granting nonprofits like, yeah, here's our group of new graduates. They're starting a nonprofit. We'll grant them $5,000 startup capital. I think that's possible. I'm not totally sure, but something like that. Or you have like a nonprofit business center.
Certainly possibilities to explore. I want to shift a little bit. Is there anything else that we need to talk about, first of all, with the rise in ahead metrics before we move into other things to do about this and also what other professions in a similar boat are doing? Anything else that we need to talk about with rise and ahead?
Well, the ahead metrics, it's similar. It was a negotiated rulemaking that figured out the earnings test. So it defined, okay, you got to make more than a bachelor's degree if you have a graduate degree, or if it's a bachelor's degree, you got to make more than a high school diploma. And then what I participated in recently was the AIM negotiated rulemaking, accreditation, innovation, and modernization. So similar process, we figured out the rules, we revised the rules for accreditors.
Who's the we here and where were you? What is this?
This was with the Department of Education in Washington, D.C. So it was really cool process, really intense, but those rules are planned to go into effect July 2027. So again, we're on a fast time frame. So not only are the loans changing, the earnings are changing, but the rules for accreditors like ACOM will be changing, and they're going to, like, one thing that's going to be more strict is this accreditor separate and independent? So there's a little bit more stringent definitions of that, and conflicts of interest, and more rules around that, more clearer rules, and hey, how are you developing your standards? And it's also saying if you're wanting to increase your degree length and increase the number of credits, you need to justify that. Like, why is that in the public benefit? And so I'm not quite sure how it works for already established degree pathways, but it's all along this same direction of why are students paying so much for these entry-level credentials. So that's another huge change that's coming.
So this AIM thing, help me understand a little bit more about how the credentialing authorities are in the mix here and how this might affect them.
Probably, as you know, there's essentially a regulatory monopoly that through the acupuncture accreditor, ACOM, and the standardized testing nonprofit, NICBOM, because it's basically the only way you can get an acupuncture license. And so part of the AIM rules are looking at, like, are accreditors restricting access to employment in some way? Are they actually kind of acting neutrally? Are they not being unduly influenced by, let's say, the school association or a trade association? Like, the accreditor is supposed to be holding a high quality standard and involving multiple constituency groups and not being unduly influenced by certain parties. It's a similar thing for naturopathic medicine. There's essentially like a regulatory monopoly. So there's no way for different parties to like enter into the ecosystem.
Now, let's say nurses or physical therapists. Are they operating under a similar system, or does their credentialing different than ours?
I imagine it's similar, because that's it was just the way that professions conducted themselves. They tried to get a national programmatic accreditor. They tried to get a national exam, because that way you could have portability across states.
Those are good things.
Yeah, what happened is that it kind of stifled changes, it stifled conversations, it sort of set that layer up it entrenched that layer of administration And then you just saw the prices go up and up.
When you say entrenched a layer of administration, what does that mean?
What I mean is it clear? It's not clear to me how, for example, in naturopathic medicine, if you go to the standardized testing website, it's very simplistic. There's not a lot of information on it. It's very difficult to tell how conclusions were reached. So, how was this test put together? What's the process? Who are the board members? Who was on the committee? Who's making these questions, and like how is this being analyzed statistically? When was the last job analysis done? So it's basically like, what is any of this actually based on? And do these institutions or do these nonprofits show their work? Can they demonstrate how they arrived at this? Is it like rational and defensible? Now, the NICBOM exam certificate is accredited by the National Council of Certifying Agencies, which is an accreditor that looks at certificate programs. Mm-hmm. And so NICBOM has to follow those standards. So it's like, can you actually explain yourself to a third party and to the public?
And so the answer for NICBOM is yes.
In theory, yeah. I think we'll see how it plays out, right? So if, let's say in a state, so like in Oregon, we're asking the Oregon Medical Board to define hours and content that make someone eligible for licensure. But this is what I mean and this is where you get into like regulatory monopoly, because everybody needs to take the NICBOM exam, right, to qualify for licensure. But the only direct and simple route to qualify for to sit for the NICBOM exam is to graduate from an ACOM accredited school. So these things interlock and they play off of each other. So, but why couldn't NICBOM say, as long as you meet requirements for state license, as long as you meet the educational qualifications for state licensure, you can sit for our exam?
Okay, let me see if I have this. So there would be multiple ways to sit for NICBOM.
Exactly.
One is graduating from an ACOM approved school.
Right.
And the other is meeting the state regulations for an acupuncture education, however it's defined by that particular one state.
Yeah. And so ideally, standardized testing agencies should be impartial regarding their candidate qualifications, right? They shouldn't be able to say, you can't do our exam just because you didn't go through this, or like our preferred partner. There should be a reason for their candidate qualifications. So remains to be seen how they will, justify that and explain that. But that's the kind of thing you need to kind of break open the entrenched interests, is that you need to have optionality and you need to have competition. And then you can have, somewhat of an open market where students can actually have a choice and actually have options.
Well, open markets and diverse ecosystems tend to be more stable. There is that. I want to come back to, I'm trying to wrap my head around this, so help me out here.
Mm-hmm.
The NICBOM is really helpful because any state that says, hey, you got a NICBOM, you can come practice here, welcome, come on in. In Oregon, I get it that you want to have an alternative path to licensure. And as we just discussed, having multiple pathways is good for any ecosystem. Having diversity in markets is generally good. But if the NICBOM is giving people portability on a national basis, and someone from Oregon, let's just say this goes through, and someone from Oregon can now sit for NICBOM based on the rules and laws of Oregon, like how's that going to work if I'm in Missouri and we have different regulations?
Yeah, that's the problem. Yeah, is that it's a state by state regulatory environment. And so you can see the appeal of the states kind of passing
for sure
the vetting off to, because they don't want to spend much money doing that. So yeah, that's where the training programs have to be specifically accurate and honest about what states you can actually get licensed in when you go through the program. Ideally, yeah, you do have portability, but a national infrastructure costs money to maintain. Yeah, like we talked about, the accreditor, the National Program Accreditor, depends on fees from schools, which is funded by student debt, right? The school association depends on fees from schools, which is funded by student debt. The NICBOM test depends on candidate fees, which is funded by student debt. And so once that funding is drastically reduced, you're just going to have less, money available to maintain that whole system. We'll see how it plays out.
Would it be fair to say that beyond the politics of it, and there's plenty of politics, because look, anytime you have more than two people in a room, you got politics. Beyond the politics of it, I think what I hear you saying, correct me if I'm wrong, as the student loan money dries up because of the RISE rule, there's just going to be less money coming into the system. If there's less money coming into the system, these organizations that have helped to support our profession and helped build it out onto a national level, they would in turn be threatened because there's just not enough money coming into the system to keep it afloat. And so I can see on one hand, yeah, let's do whatever we can to keep that money coming in because we want to keep our portability, we want to keep the system going. The other question is balanced on the back of who?
Right. And because the availability of the loan money allowed, tuition to just keep getting raised. Maybe it was just with inflation, right?
Well, there's that too. Fair enough.
Raising that and providing, let's say, what would maybe be considered a reasonable, like middle class pay package to staff and faculty and to administrators, that ability to run an organization like that is going to be greatly reduced, which is not unusual in higher education. So, when you start seeing things like layoffs or no cost of living adjustments, or we're combining classes into one big group, like those are all adaptations to the budgetary changes that are pretty much, they're pretty much here, right? We're talking about budgeting for summer and then fall.
I got a couple more questions, but we've taken a pretty good look at what's happening in our professions, some of the challenges that we're facing, what's happening because of federal guidelines, where the money's coming from, where it's not going to be coming from, and what's being done about it. Look, in some ways, fair enough, kick the can down the road. Things might change. Might get a new administration. Things could be different. Bring people in, a month early to get under the wire. I understand how these are ways of trying to solve the problem. There's also the work that you've been involved with in Oregon with looking for that alternative way toward licensing. I find it really interesting that ACOM has this straw poll that they put out with some propositions in many ways looks very similar to the work that you guys have been doing. It mirrors it in many ways. Again, you're closer to the ground with this, but I think both of these proposals are looking at the reality of what's coming and trying to figure out how do we keep things going. It may not be optimal or what we wanted, but it's what we got and how do we make it work?
Yeah, I think that's kind of one thing I hope gets that there's a greater appreciation that kind of sinks in is that, look, we're at the point of what do you want? What can you salvage here? Right. So like if you're looking at, and it's great that ACOM is engaging with this because that's a huge first step is acknowledging the issues. And when you have that's a key piece is we need to have institutional players acknowledge reality and the state of where things are at, because that then opens up the conversation so we can have the ideas coming in and working through and having an orderly conversation that's kind of put through this organizational bureaucratic process. That's all good. To comment on those three proposals, I don't understand how 1 and 3 solves the earnings test issue because it still involves a master's degree. So those, at least the schools that currently have, right, master's degree programs, like even if they reduced the credit load, that program would still be judged by the earnings test. So it's still a little bit of like, I don't think people are quite like, it's fine, we can talk about it, but it should also be mentioned. And I think it does in the proposal. It's like, here's a proposal. This doesn't actually solve one of the main problems. So it's like, well, at this point, if we've got like a year or 2 years, how much energy should we really be expending on options that don't immediately solve our problem there? So there's that, but it is a start, and
it's a start, and it's helpful to have different options in that start and different perspectives, because look, maybe they drop down the hours, reframe what needs to be where, like what buckets need to be filled. Maybe the price of the schooling comes down, and then it fits in the matrix that we're getting from the government, because we need to steer between the guardrails here. And we're trying to figure that out.
Yeah, I don't think those proposals particularly save most of the schools, because you're talking about, let's reduce the hours. Okay, that's revenue, right? So you're reducing school revenue. And you already have schools closing. You have 7 schools on heightened cash monitoring. Like, this is all before the loan caps and the earnings test. It's still like, all these issues still remain. It doesn't solve, but it's good that we're trying to salvage some things. And I think acupuncture is far ahead of naturopathic medicine in having the conversation and being real about it. And in particular, I think Oregon acupuncturists are really lucky that the OAA is actually trying to solve the problem and engaging with it. So it does involve a lot of back and forth, and there will be a whole political rulemaking process involved with all of this. But just that the conversation's getting going is actually really heartening, because there was, when I graduated in June 2025, part of why I started writing the Substack was like, somebody has to say something like this can't go on. Like, something's got to change. Like, people should know, especially new students coming in should really understand the risk that they are taking on. And frankly, the risk that these schools and institutions seem all too comfortable placing onto students, which I think is extremely problematic, yet you find out it's kind of par for the course. But just that the conversation is building, right? It feels like the cat's out of the bag. We're now acknowledging reality, and we can get into realistic responses to that. I sort of fear I don't see that happening in naturopathic medicine. So I think we're behind on that. So, and I think acupuncturists are actually quite fortunate that there's an option to, I guess, step down or right size the credential. I guess some people have a problem with that, but it's like, at least you have the option, to do that. You're not stuck in the doctorate. You're not stuck in the master's level. Like, you can get to this entry level standard.
Right size is a really interesting concept. And look, it's a whole other conversation. I don't want to get into it today, although maybe we could on another day. This might even be good for a panel in terms of what is inappropriate, especially given the circumstances that we're facing. What's an appropriate entry level? I get it that people want to have a doctorate because we want to be on parity with other doctors, and there's a medical system that appreciates doctors. We want to try to be a part of that. Do we get part of that if our system only allows us to get a bachelor's? These are dialogues. These are discussions I think we need to work out as a profession. So maybe a panel on that would be really helpful. I want to step back as a way of closing to look at that broader landscape for a moment. Because, like I said, in 2005, Grad Plus loans came in. It changed the environment for education in many ways, right? More money coming in, which went in all kinds of different places. Fair enough. That's what money does. It flows through an economic system. That's how it works. I've no gripe with that. But it's changed education, not just for acupuncturists and naturopaths, but like across the board. And why am I saying this? I'm saying this because, and I believe it was something I read on your Substack, it's not just the alternative medicine community that's suffering. There are colleges, some of them have been around a long time, nice liberal arts colleges. They're gone, or they're on their way out. So it's not just us. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like there's some kind of a sea change, and there's other parts of the educational environment that are also being affected. I would appreciate if you take a couple of minutes and speak to that so we can get a sense of where do we stand in relation to the larger situation that's unfolding for us.
Yeah, for sure. It's a generational shift that's going on, right? You have less college age, like less high school graduates, because there's just less people, less students. And then you have a lower participation rate. So a lower percentage of that lower number, wanting to do, let's say, a 4-year bachelor's degree. And you have this dynamic wherein schools cannot acknowledge when things aren't going great, because that then they're afraid that affects enrollment, and then it's a downward spiral. And that's just for schools, in general. And then you have the dynamic of, accreditors not being really on top of things and not wanting to say negative things about a school they accredit, because again, that's kind of the downward spiral. But it is this giant societal shift, which to me is like, okay, yeah, we can acknowledge that. To me, that makes it even more difficult of a problem, because if nobody can figure this out, then we're all kind of in trouble, right? And that, like, the larger problem does not save acupuncture and naturopathic medicine, right? To me, it makes it even more difficult, even more of a puzzle. But things are changing, I think, they're getting better, because I think students and their families are, starting to ask the right questions, expect more out of institutions. I think the accreditors probably will get a little more stringent on the early warnings. An organization is a sort of living sociological entity, and it doesn't want to close down. It doesn't want to die. It wants to continue its mission. But in a lot of cases, that's what really needs to happen. What should happen is a dignified closure or a dignified transition. And a lot of times that doesn't happen at schools. There's continually a trickle of news stories coming out related to acupuncture, the closure of the Phoenix Institute of Herbal Medicine and Acupuncture I think it was in May. The students got locked out of their facilities. The landlord locked the doors in the middle of the term. And now they have to transfer, go to school that's an hour away. And it happened with OCOM too. We're fine, we're closed. And saying no plans to close 3 months before, okay, we're closing. And then all those students came to NUNM. And so the fewer options there are as more schools close, then it makes it even worse when the few remaining close, because there's less transfer options. So it's just a huge issue. I think board members and students and staff and faculty need to have just stark, sober conversations of what's your 3-year plan? What's your criteria for a dignified closure, right? How much would it cost us to run a teach out year without accepting new students? And how much actual, unrestricted net assets do we actually have that could run that? Because otherwise you're stuck and you just are going to get these closure announcements. Like, you're going to bring a new group in, and then halfway through that year, it's like, sorry, we got to close, and that's just really not fair. Again, it's more risk on students. It's not fair to them. It's not fair to staff and faculty to close suddenly, right? They should ideally get a severance package so that they can go look for different employment. And so hopefully, institutions and their leadership will start acting appropriately and I think ethically in right relationship to all the participants of that ecosystem. But I'm not really holding my breath for that to happen because of all the incentives that push schools to just go right up to the brink. And
yes, incentives. So you mentioned demographics. I just want to come back to this for a second. Demographics, fewer people coming into the system, fewer younger people, period, right? I mean, there's a decline in population going on kind of worldwide. So some of what we're seeing with higher education is that there's just fewer people coming in and using those services, okay? We've got institutions for all the right reasons. They want to stay alive and continue with their mission. If things aren't going well in a business, most businesses are not going to telegraph, hey, our business isn't doing so well. That's just the way it works. And fair enough, because you want to try to show the bright side. You want to try to show how things are working well. Because, if you say things are not going well, they're going to get worse for sure. Because people are going to look at that product that you have or that education you have and go, yeah, I'm not going there. Those guys are on shaky ground. So I get that. I get it. And there's a reason for that. What I think is most disturbing for me, and you've spoken to this, is that schools are closing almost overnight. It's like, here we are. No, we're not. And that throws a ripple of distrust through the entire ecosystem. And I can't imagine young people coming into any schooling situation knowing that schools are failing and not be concerned.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it also kind of, when schools close suddenly like that, it really, to me, calls into question the validity of their accreditor, right? That's supposed to be monitoring their financial stability. So I think that's kind of a larger issue. But it also speaks to the importance of having a positive plan forward, right? Of like, you don't just, I understand people don't want to dwell on like bad things and negative things. If you're asking students to come in for 3 to 4 years, you should really have a 3-year strategy, right? For the school of saying like, all right, we are teaching out these programs. They don't make sense for us. We're looking at starting these programs. We're right sizing the school. So there are positive things that can be done of like, how does leadership going to deal with this? And I think in a business, if you had a publicly traded business, of course, the stockholders would be looking at the CEO and saying, what's the plan? And if there was no plan, you'd get that CEO is like gone. But I think there's again, it's a sort of entrenchment. Like you have a lot of people who have held positions for like a long period of time, and like sit back and wait approach is like not going to cut it. Like we can all see these giant, huge changes. So like, what's the plan to adapt to these? And how did you arrive at that plan? I think that would ease my anxiety a lot if I saw, when I see schools doing that, say like, we acknowledge this is hard. Here's our plan. Here's our timeline. Then I think, okay, that's reasonable. But like radio silence is like, ooh, no, because we all know everything's shifting and changing. We all know these huge things are happening. And so when institutions and schools and organizations don't say anything about it, then it starts to, that sort of says a lot about where things are headed.
And that's where rumors and distrust and anxiety all arises. There's that. So, well, I thank you for joining me today for a conversation, for a difficult conversation, for maybe even a contentious conversation, depending on where you land in the ecosystem. But to be able to talk about it, to be able to speak to it, the advantages that we've had by getting money to be able to learn certain things, the troubles that brings if that money is on the wrong side of the balance sheet. I appreciate all the work that you've done. You've gone from naturopath to debt expert, and I really appreciate you taking a moment, sharing what you've got. You've got a Substack that goes way into it. I'll send folks in that direction. Any resources, Ryan, that you want to send to share with folks, I'll put it on the show notes page.
Okay, great. Yeah, if people can, subscribe to the Substack. I put out free posts, and then there's some there's some subscription content too. And I'll just be, kind of chronicling the next few years as we go through these changes in naturopathic and acupuncture education. And I just appreciate you allowing this conversation to happen on your podcast. And it's really what's needed is to have sort of long form, explanatory, sometimes meandering conversations that touch on things from multiple angles. So I appreciate it.
Amen, brother. These are not sound bites. These are not quick bits. These are not Instagram reels. It really takes these long form conversations, and probably more than one, because we're dealing with complex interactive environments, government, private business, sociological trends, cultural changes, demographics. All of this comes to play. It's not simple. And so thanks for starting the conversation. I'm sure we'll come back and have some more as these things unfold, which they are, and very quickly.
Yes. Great. Let's do it. I look forward to it.
All right, Ryan. Me too. Till next time then. The Grad Plus loans that changed the educational landscape, it infused money into the educational system, and while it did help many to get an advanced education, that education did not always translate into an income that would service the loan. Today, we are seeing some of the fallout of that with people who service a loan for decades but never pay it off. Likewise, the educational institutions, they got used to a reliable cash flow. All of that has changed, and the effects begin to take effect in July. It's a reckoning that not only the acupuncture trade faces, but many other professions as well. As we heard in this conversation with Ryan, there are a number of ways of dealing with the debt of school loans, and many people don't find out about what's involved until they're out of school. It's a whole new curriculum in financial literacy. There are challenges ahead in how we respond if the schools fail or find a way to thrive, if we are able to keep our accreditation and testing agencies so as to assure portability of licenses between states. All of these are critically important issues. As to the issue of debt, because while the RISE Act and the AHEAD metric for sure are problematic for the way things are currently structured, we also need to be realistic about the kinds of burdens that we're placing on new practitioners. Just because someone walks out of a doctoral program in acupuncture, it doesn't mean that they walk into the same world as an MD doctor with a vast ecosystem of jobs and opportunities. It would be a mistake to conflate the title of doctor with meaning that you'll have more opportunities. We are indeed at an uncomfortable moment of reckoning, and I hope that these conversations will help us in charting a course through the challenges that together we'll be facing as we move forward.